And I will say it's very easy to speak truth from this podium when you have a president who is implementing.
The White House press briefing room was buzzing with reporters, cameras flashing as journalists whispered among themselves, waiting for the day's main event. President Trump's press secretary, Catherine Reynolds, stood confidently behind the podium, her crisp suit immaculate, her expression calm but firm. At the front row sat Daniel Carter, a senior reporter from CNN, known for his relentless criticism of the Trump administration. His reputation for twisting narratives had made him a divisive figure in the press corps. Today, he was armed with another pointed question, one designed to put the administration on the defensive. As soon as Reynolds acknowledged him, Carter stood up, voice laced with self-righteousness. "Madam Press Secretary, can you explain why President Trump continues to spread misinformation about voter suppression, despite overwhelming evidence that no such fraud has occurred?" His words were deliberate, accusatory, designed to provoke. A few murmurs rippled through the room. Catherine didn't flinch. She had handled worse before. Adjusting the microphone, she smiled slightly, just enough to show she was ready for this battle. "Daniel," she began, her tone polite but firm, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but let's get something straight. The president has cited multiple reports, sworn affidavits, and even video evidence of irregularities in the election process. Are you suggesting that the people who signed these legal documents, under penalty of perjury, are all lying?" Carter smirked, sensing an opportunity. "What I'm saying is that independent fact-checkers have debunked many of these claims, and yet President Trump continues to push these narratives." Reynolds leaned forward. "Independent fact-checkers? You mean the same organizations that claimed the Steele dossier was credible? The same ones that dismissed the Hunter Biden laptop story as Russian disinformation until it was proven true?" A few reporters shifted in their seats. Carter's confident expression wavered slightly. "I find it interesting," Reynolds continued, "that when CNN misreports stories, there's no accountability. You ran with the Fine People hoax for years, misleading Americans into believing President Trump called white supremacists fine people, when the full quote shows he explicitly condemned them. Did your network ever issue a correction, Daniel?" Carter opened his mouth, but no words came out. Reynolds pressed on. "And let's not forget your network's claim that the Biden administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan was strategic, when in reality, it left Americans stranded and handed billions in military equipment to the Taliban. Should we talk about the hypocrisy in how CNN covers this administration versus the last?" The room was silent now. Even journalists who typically sided with Carter were watching him squirm under Reynolds' relentless counterattack. "This administration will always stand for the truth," Reynolds concluded. "I suggest CNN try that sometime." The briefing room erupted in murmurs, some reporters suppressing smirks, others hurriedly typing notes. Carter, face flushed, sank back into his seat. Reynolds had humiliated him without breaking a sweat. As the murmurs in the briefing room died down, Daniel Carter shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face still flushed from the public humiliation. He wasn't used to being challenged so directly, especially not by a press secretary who had mastered the art of turning accusations back on the accuser, but he wasn't done yet. Clearing his throat, he leaned forward again, gripping his notepad tightly. "So, Catherine, are you saying that CNN is deliberately misleading the public?" That seems like a pretty bold accusation for a government official to make. Catherine Reynolds didn't miss a beat. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Daniel, let me be clear. I'm not accusing. I'm stating facts. CNN has a track record of misrepresenting events, selectively editing statements, and pushing narratives that align with a political agenda. That's not journalism. That's activism." A few gasps echoed through the room. Some reporters exchanged glances, sensing the growing tension. A few even looked at their own notes, wondering if they had ever crossed the same line. Carter scoffed, shaking his head. "That's rich coming from an administration that has actively worked to discredit the free press." Catherine chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Discredit? No, Daniel, we're holding the media accountable. there's a difference. The press is supposed to challenge power, not protect one party while attacking another. And let's not forget, your network spent 4 years pushing the Russian collusion hoax with zero evidence. But when actual corruption surfaces involving Hunter Biden, your so-called free press suddenly loses interest. Carter's jaw clenched. His usual smug demeanor was gone, replaced with frustration. "We report the facts as they are presented." "Really?" Catherine interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Then why did your network label the violent riots of 2020 as mostly peaceful protests, while buildings burned behind your reporters? Why did you push the baseless Trump called the military losers story without verifying sources? And let's not even start on how you framed the border crisis." Carter opened his mouth again, but this time no words came. Reynolds continued, her voice steady and firm. "You see, Daniel, the American people are not stupid. They see the double standards. They see how you twist words, how you bury inconvenient truths, and how you selectively amplify stories that fit a specific narrative. And that's why trust in the mainstream media is at an all-time low." The room was dead silent now. Even journalists from other networks were staring at Carter, waiting to see how he would respond. But he had nothing. Catherine glanced around the room, her expression unwavering. "Next question." A reporter from another outlet quickly raised his hand, eager to shift the discussion away from Carter's public dismantling. But as the press conference moved on, the damage was already done. The clip of Carter being humiliated by Reynolds would go viral within hours. And for once, CNN wouldn't be able to spin their way out of it. As the press conference continued, Daniel Carter sat stiffly in his chair, his mind racing. He could already imagine how this would play out online. Conservative outlets would be replaying his humiliation on a loop, while his own network would either ignore it or try to spin it as an attack on journalism. But he knew the truth. Catherine Reynolds had backed him into a corner, and there was no easy way out. Still, his pride wouldn't let him stay silent. He needed to regain control of the narrative. Lifting his chin, he leaned forward and spoke. Again, his voice slightly strained. "Madam Press Secretary, you talk about accountability, but let's talk about the President's own track record with the truth. Are you saying that he's never spread misinformation?" A few other reporters turned their heads, sensing another round of battle. Catherine didn't even blink. She folded her hands on the podium and gave Carter a knowing smile, the kind that said, "Nice try, but you're not fooling anyone." "Daniel," she said smoothly, "you're making an interesting argument, but let's dissect it. When you say misinformation, are you referring to the President's economic predictions, which, by the way, turned out to be correct? Or perhaps you're talking about his early warnings on energy dependence, which, shockingly, have also been proven accurate?" Carter clenched his jaw but said nothing. "Or," Catherine continued, tilting her head, "are you talking about how he called for border security years ago, and now we have an administration struggling to contain the crisis he warned about? I'm just curious which misinformation you're referring to, because history seems to be proving the President right on quite a few things." A few reporters scribbled in their notebooks, while others just stared at Carter, waiting for his next move. He had nothing. Catherine took a sip of water, then set the glass down carefully. "You see, Daniel, there's a difference between being wrong and intentionally misleading the public. Your network has a habit of doing the latter." Carter exhaled sharply, his fingers gripping his notepad. He had lost control of the conversation, and he knew it. Before he could come up with a weak retort, another reporter, sensing his struggle, jumped in. "Catherine, what's the White House's response to accusations that it is undermining democracy by questioning the integrity of the electoral process?" Catherine turned to face the new speaker, her expression serious. "The White House is committed to protecting democracy by ensuring that every legal vote counts and that elections are conducted fairly. If questioning irregularities is considered undermining democracy, then what do you call the years of unfounded claims that the 2016 election was stolen by foreign interference?" The reporter hesitated. He hadn't expected that response. Catherine pressed on. "For years we were told by networks, including CNN, that our elections weren't secure. that Russia had manipulated votes, that democracy itself was in danger. And yet, when this administration raises concerns about inconsistencies, suddenly it's an attack on democracy. The double standard is breathtaking. Carter shifted in his chair, his face still flushed with frustration. He wanted to push back, to regain his composure, but he knew it was too late. Catherine Reynolds had won, again. As the press conference wrapped up, the reporters filed out, murmuring among themselves. Carter avoided eye contact with anyone. He knew that within minutes the clips would be circulating, his reputation taking another hit. And somewhere in the West Wing, President Trump was probably watching, smirking at the spectacle. Because today, once again, his press secretary had made the media eat their own words. As Daniel Carter left the briefing room, his heart pounded with frustration. He had been embarrassed before, but never like this. Reynolds had made a spectacle of him, and he knew the headlines would not be kind. Outside the press room, he pulled out his phone. Messages flooded in from colleagues, some sympathetic, others mocking. One in particular caught his eye. That was brutal. You need to get ahead of this. Carter clenched his teeth. He knew exactly what that meant. Damage control. He had two options: ignore the story and hope it faded, or try to spin it before conservative media could run wild with it. He rushed back to CNN's Washington bureau, his mind racing. The newsroom was buzzing when he walked in. His producer, Michelle Lawson, was already waiting for him at his desk, arms crossed, lips pressed together. "That was a disaster," she said bluntly. Carter threw his notepad onto the desk. "You think I don't know that?" Michelle exhaled, sharply. "We need a response before the right-wing networks start replaying this on a loop. They're already calling it your humiliation moment." Carter ran a hand through his hair. "What's the angle?" She tapped her nails on his desk, thinking. "We frame it as an attack on journalism. Make Reynolds look like a bully, someone trying to silence the free press. We say she dodged real questions and went on a rant to distract from the administration's failures." Carter hesitated. He had been the one cornered, not the other way around. But he also knew how the game was played. The truth didn't matter, only perception. "Fine," he said, "let's do it." Within an hour, CNN aired a segment titled "White House Press Secretary Attacks Free Press in Heated Exchange." The clip showed Carter's questions, but carefully cut out some of Reynolds' most damning responses. "This is a dangerous moment for democracy," a panelist gravely said. "When a press secretary spends more time attacking journalists than answering legitimate questions, we have to ask, what is this administration hiding?" Carter watched from the corner of the newsroom, sipping his coffee. The edited clip painted him as a victim, a brave reporter who had stood up to a hostile government official. The reality, of course, was much different. But it didn't matter. Perception was reality. Just as he began to relax, his phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "You can spin it all you want, Daniel. The American people saw what really happened." Carter felt a chill crawl up his spine. He looked around the newsroom, but no one was watching him. Who had sent the message? And, more importantly, what else did they know?